There is a specific kind of suffering that only traders know. It is not the suffering of losing money, exactly though that is part of it. It is the suffering of watching yourself make the same mistake again, of knowing, with complete clarity, what you should have done and being utterly unable to do it in the moment it mattered. You freeze when you should enter, you exit when you should hold. You hold when you should exit, and afterward, sitting with the result, you think, I knew better. Why didn't I do better? That question kept me up for years. And I eventually arrived at the answer that actually changed how I traded, not just how I thought about trading, is that the problem was never knowledge. It was never the system. It was the mental framework I was using to operate in the market. The beliefs I held about what the market was, what my losses meant, what certainty was supposed to feel like before I acted. Those beliefs were wrong, and they were costing me everything. What I want to share with you today are 3 laws, 3 foundational principles that govern what it actually takes to trade without fear, without hesitation, without the internal war that exhausts most traders long before the market ever gets the chance to teach them anything useful. These laws are not complicated. They are not secret, but they run directly against the way most human minds are wired, which is why most traders never fully absorb them and why most traders never reach the kind of consistency they're looking for. The first law is this: every single moment in the market is unique. I want you to sit with that for a second before you dismiss it, because I know what the immediate response is. You've seen this pattern before. You've seen this setup 100 times. Head and shoulders, double top, breakout from consolidation, moving average crossover. You recognize these. You've traded them, so how can every moment be unique? Here is the distinction. Yes, chart patterns repeat, price structures repeat, certain configurations of highs and lows appear again and again across time and across instruments. But the moment you are in right now with this specific group of market participants, with this specific macro backdrop, this specific liquidity environment, this specific mix of fear and greed and positioning in the broader market, that moment has never existed before, and it will never exist again. Not exactly like this. The human mind is a pattern recognition machine. That is its greatest strength in most environments. You touch a hot stove and get burned, and from that point forward, your nervous system links the sight of a hot stove to the anticipation of pain. That linkage keeps you safe. It is fast, automatic, and in most physical environments, reliable. But in the market, that same mechanism becomes a liability, because when you see a chart setup that looks like a previous losing trade, your nervous system fires before your rational mind has a chance to evaluate the current situation on its own terms. Cortisol enters your bloodstream. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for deliberate, rational decision-making, starts getting suppressed. Your fight-or-flight system engages, and you experience all of that as hesitation, as a sudden need for one more confirmation, as the creeping doubt that makes you wait until the move is already gone, or it works the other way. The setup looks like a previous big winner. Dopamine fires. You feel the excitement building, and you size up, you enter early, you bend your rules slightly because your nervous system is not responding to what is actually in front of you, it is responding to a memory, to a past trade that lives only in your mind, not in the market. In both cases, you are not trading the current moment. You are haunted by previous ones. And the market does not care. The market has no memory of your last trade, your last losing streak, your last big win. Each moment simply is what it is, neutral, new, and completely indifferent to your history with similar-looking situations. When you truly internalize this, not just understand it but feel it, operate from it, something significant shifts. You stop approaching setups through the filter of what happened last time. You start seeing the actual information that is present right now. You stop needing the setup to be better than what your rules require, because you are no longer overcompensating for the emotional weight of previous trades. Each trade stands on its own. Each moment gets evaluated as what it is, not what it reminds you of. There is also a structural dimension to this law that goes beyond psychology. The market is not a machine. It is a living, dynamic aggregate of millions of human decisions happening simultaneously, decisions made by people with different information, different time frames, different risk tolerances, different emotional states. That composition changes constantly. Every day, some participants leave the market and others enter. The macro environment shifts. The volatility regime changes. News enters the system. Liquidity conditions evolve. This means that when you backtest a pattern and find it works 70% of the time over a 10-year sample, you are measuring something real but incomplete. You are measuring how that pattern performed across the historical composition of participants and conditions in your test period. You are not measuring how it will perform in this specific moment, with today's specific participants and conditions, which are genuinely different from any moment in your sample. Your edge is a probabilistic approximation, not a law of physics. It is real, it is worth trading, but it must be held with appropriate humility, enough humility that your risk management never assumes a certainty that doesn't exist. The traders who survived the 2008 financial crisis, the ones who navigated the flash crashes, the ones who are still trading after 30 years, they share one quality more than any other. They never let their certainty about a setup outrun their respect for what they did not and could not know. Every moment being unique was not just a psychological comfort to them. It was a structural fact they had genuinely internalized, and it kept their position sizing honest even when their conviction was high. That is the first law. And you need it before the second law makes sense, because the second law builds directly on it. The second law is, think in probabilities, not certainties. Most traders, and I was guilty of this for years, approach the market as if the goal is to figure out what is going to happen. As if there is a correct answer available somewhere, and with enough study, the right indicator, the right mentor, the right system, you will eventually be able to know the outcome of a trade before you enter it. With certainty, every time. And when they do not win every time, which is always, which is everyone, they conclude that they simply do not know enough yet. They study more, they add more indicators, they change systems. They chase the feeling of certainty that the market, by its nature, will never provide. Here's the truth. Uncertainty is not a flaw in the market. It is a structural feature. It is what the market is. You cannot eliminate it with more knowledge because it does not arise from ignorance. It arises from the fact that price is determined by millions of decisions, many of which are unknowable in advance, made by participants whose intentions and information you cannot fully access. Accepting that is not pessimism, it is accurate. And once you stop fighting it, once you genuinely stop looking for the certainty that will never come, you become free to do something far more powerful. You start working with probability. Think about a casino. The casino does not know whether the next hand of blackjack will go to the player or the house. The casino cannot predict any individual outcome. And yet the casino makes money, consistently, year after year, decade after decade, because the casino is not in the business of predicting outcomes. The casino is in the business of applying a small statistical edge, a few percentage points across an enormous number of events. Over a large enough sample, the math expresses itself and the house always wins, even though individual hands are completely unpredictable. That is the mental model. Not just as an analogy, but as a literal description of how the most consistently profitable traders I have ever encountered actually operate. They know they have an edge, a set of conditions that, when they appear, produces favorable outcomes more often than not, or produces wins large enough relative to losses that the overall expectation is positive. They understand that this edge tells them nothing about the next individual trade. It only tells them that across the next 50 or 100 trades, the math will likely tilt in their favor. So they focus entirely on executing every trade correctly according to their rules, and they release attachment to what any single trade does. The practical failure of most traders is not that they lack this framework intellectually. They've heard the casino analogy, they understand probability in theory. The failure is that they evaluate themselves trade by trade rather than across sequences of trades. Win. I'm good, my system works. Loss. Something is wrong, maybe my system is broken. 2 losses in a row. I need to rethink everything. That emotional oscillation, that constant recalibration based on the most recent single outcome makes consistent execution impossible, because your behavior is being driven by your emotional state rather than by your edge. Here's what probability thinking actually looks like in practice. If your system has a 55% win rate with an average winner 1.5 times your average loser, you have a genuinely positive expectancy system. You should make money over a large sample. But embedded in that system's distribution of outcomes is the very real possibility, the statistical expectation of 5, 6, 7 consecutive losses. Not often, but it will happen. If you have not sat down and worked out your system's expected distribution, if you have not psychologically prepared yourself for what a bad sequence looks like when the edge is still intact, then when that streak hits, you will not recognize it for what it is. You will change your system, or stop trading it, or double your size trying to recover. And in doing any of those things, you destroy the very edge you were trying to capture. The casino metaphor I used earlier, I want to push it a little further because I think most people hear it and agree with it and then go right back to trading as if outcomes matter. The casino does not just intellectually accept that individual hands are unpredictable. The casino has built its entire operation around that acceptance. The table limits, the house rules, the staffing levels, the security systems, the financial reserves, all of it is designed by an organization that has fully internalized the probabilistic nature of its business and structured its behavior accordingly. The acceptance is not a thought the casino has. It is baked into every decision the casino makes. That is the standard. Not thinking about probability when you remember to. Not reminding yourself before you enter a trade that any single outcome is just one sample. But structuring your entire trading operation, your position sizing, your rules, your review process, your definition of a good day around the genuine acceptance of uncertainty. When you have done that, you are not fighting your psychology every time you sit down to trade. You have already won that fight in advance, through the way you have set up how you operate. Let me give you something concrete. Most traders measure their performance by their profit and loss at the end of the day or the week. That metric, by itself, drives terrible behavior. It incentivizes exactly the kind of outcome-focused thinking that destroys execution quality. A better metric, the metric the traders I respect most use, is execution rate. What percentage of valid setups did you take? What percentage of your stops did you honor without moving? What percentage of your exits followed your rules rather than your emotions? A trader with an 80% execution rate on a losing week has had a better week from a process standpoint than a trader with a 40% execution rate on a winning week. Because the high execution trader is building the habits that will capture their edge consistently over time. The low execution trader got lucky and will give it back. That reframing from profit and loss to execution quality as the primary performance metric is one of the most practical expressions of probability thinking I know. It changes what you pay attention to. It changes what you celebrate and what you examine critically. And it gradually shifts how your nervous system responds to the inevitable losing trades. Because losing trades that were executed correctly no longer represent failure, they represent the work being done correctly. I also want to say something about the timeline. The shift I am describing from fear-based, outcome-focused, identity-threatened trading to process-based, probability thinking, risk-accepting trading does not happen in a week. It does not happen from reading a book or watching a series of videos, including this one. It happens through repeated, deliberate experience, through taking trades and noticing your emotional reactions in real time, not after, through building what some people call a witness, a part of your mind that observes your own reactions without being controlled by them, through keeping records not just of your trades but of your mental state during those trades so you can identify the specific triggers that cause you to deviate from your process. It is slow work. It is less exciting than backtesting a new system or learning a new indicator, and it is the only work that actually changes things at the level where trading behavior is actually determined at the level of belief, not technique. The traders who do this work consistently, over months and years, eventually arrive at something that looks effortless from the outside. They sit down, they see the setups, they take them without drama, they manage them without anxiety, they exit cleanly, and they move on. They are not suppressing fear in those moments. They have genuinely replaced the fearful beliefs with accurate ones, beliefs that reflect the actual nature of markets rather than the nature the mind wishes markets had. And because those beliefs are accurate, the trading that flows from them is accurate, clean, consistent, sustainable. That is what is available on the other side of this work. Not a guarantee of profits on every trade, not a system that removes uncertainty, but a mind that has stopped fighting the environment it operates in and started operating within it effectively the way a sailor learns not to fight the sea but to read it, work with it, and navigate it skillfully, even when conditions are difficult. The three laws are the map. The work is the journey. And the only thing standing between where most traders are and where they want to be is the willingness to take that journey seriously, to treat the internal work as the primary work and the chart patterns and indicators as secondary tools that are only as effective as the mind using them allows them to be. Thinking in probabilities requires you to know your numbers, not just feel that your system works, but actually understand your system's distribution of outcomes in concrete terms. What is your expected maximum drawdown? What does a bad month look like when the edge is still intact and nothing is actually broken? What is the longest losing streak your system is mathematically capable of producing? If you cannot answer those questions, you are flying blind in the only way that actually matters, not blind to chart patterns, but blind to what your own system will do to you over time. And when the inevitable rough stretch comes, your mind will have no framework for interpreting it correctly. It will reach for the closest available explanation. My system is broken. I don't know what I'm doing. The market has changed. And it will start making changes exactly when it should stay the course. The shift that separates consistently profitable traders from the rest is this. They stopped evaluating themselves on individual trades and started evaluating themselves on execution quality across sequences of trades. A losing trade, taken correctly at the right setup with the stop placed properly and honored completely, is a good trade. A winning trade where you violated your rules, moved your stop, or held past your exit point is a bad trade, even if it made money. Because the winning trade that required you to break your rules tells you nothing reliable about the future, while the losing trade that was executed correctly tells you everything. Your process is intact, your edge is being applied, and the distribution will eventually express itself in your favor. That reframe from outcome to process is the heart of probability thinking. And it sounds simple, but living it in real time, with real money, when a loss hits, and your nervous system is screaming that something is wrong and you need to act, that is one of the most demanding mental disciplines I have ever encountered. Which brings us to the third law, and this is the one most people find the hardest, because the first two are difficult enough, but the third asks something that runs against some very deep human programming. The third law is accept risk completely, not manage risk, not tolerate risk, not put a stop loss in your platform and tell yourself that counts as accepting the risk. Accept it, genuinely, completely, before you enter the trade. Let me explain what I mean by that distinction, because it is where most people get lost. When traders say they manage risk, they mean they set a stop loss. They decide in advance the maximum amount they are willing to lose on a position. They enter the stop in their platform, and intellectually, they believe they have accepted the risk. But watch what happens in real time. The trade goes against them, price moves toward the stop, and as that happens, what do they feel? If the answer is anything other than neutral, if they feel dread, if they feel the urge to move the stop, if they feel hope that it will reverse before it gets there, if they feel the impulse to exit early to limit the pain, then they have not accepted the risk. They said the words, they clicked the buttons, but in the part of the mind that actually drives behavior, the risk was never truly accepted. And that matters enormously. Because the moment there is emotional charge around the stop, decision-making becomes compromised. The stop gets moved just a little further, just this once, because the setup was so good and surely it will come back. Or the position gets closed early, taking a smaller loss than planned but also cutting off trades that would have recovered. Or the trader adds to the losing position because they cannot accept that they are wrong. Every one of those actions is the direct result of risk that was never truly accepted in the first place. True acceptance looks like this. Before entering a trade, you identify the precise amount you are risking, the exact dollar figure that represents the maximum loss on this position, and you release it, not reluctantly, not with gritted teeth. You genuinely let it go. You say to yourself, in a real sense, this money is already gone. It is the cost of entering this situation. If the trade works, I will recover it and make more. If it does not, it is gone, and I am at peace with that. The money has already left my account in the only way that matters in my mind before the trade is even placed. When you enter a trade from that mental state, everything changes. You are not managing a position while simultaneously bracing for pain you have not accepted. You are simply observing the trade unfold, ready to exit cleanly at your stop if the market takes it there, with no emotional residue because there is nothing left to fear. The worst case has already been processed. It is already in the past, before it has even happened. Why is this so hard? Because it runs directly against one of the deepest psychological drives humans possess. Loss aversion, the phenomenon where the pain of losing something is experienced at roughly twice the intensity of the pleasure of gaining an equivalent amount, is not a weakness or a character flaw, it is evolution. In the ancestral environment where human psychology was shaped, losing resources could be genuinely life-threatening. The nervous system that treated potential losses as emergencies survived, the one that treated them casually did not. We are all descendants of people who took losing very seriously. That nervous system is still running in you, and it does not distinguish between a threat to your physical survival and a threat to your trading account. When a position moves against you and you have not truly accepted the risk, your nervous system fires as if you are in genuine danger. Cortisol floods your system. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executing your plan, gets suppressed in favor of your fight or flight response. And the result is behavior that makes complete sense from a survival standpoint and complete nonsense from a trading standpoint. There is also a deeper layer to this that I want to address because it explains why so many intelligent, disciplined, analytically capable people struggle with risk acceptance despite knowing better. For most of the traders I have worked with over the years, the difficulty is not purely financial, it is identity-based. Their self-concept is built on being competent, being right, being someone who understands how things work. They were good students. They succeeded in careers that rewarded analysis and expertise. And they came to the markets with the unconscious assumption that trading would work the same way that competence would produce reliable, correct predictions, and correct predictions would produce consistent profits. When a trade goes against them, it is not just money they are losing. It is, at some level, a challenge to who they are. Being wrong triggers the same neurological response as a physical threat, and when the self is under threat, the ego mobilizes to protect it by refusing to take the loss, by justifying the hold, by finding reasons why the market is wrong and the position will come back. The path through this is not to suppress the ego by sheer willpower. That does not work and does not last. The path is to gradually, through deliberate practice and repeated experience, re-anchor your identity away from outcomes and onto process. You stop defining yourself as a trader who is right. You start defining yourself as a trader who executes with integrity, who takes the setups when they appear, manages positions according to the rules, and takes losses cleanly when the market says it is time. A trader who did those three things correctly on a given day had a good day, regardless of whether that day's trades were profitable. When identity shifts to process, the emotional charge around individual outcomes begins to dissolve. A losing trade is no longer a statement about your intelligence or your competence. It is a sample and a distribution, handled correctly, in full alignment with your method. Your identity is intact. Your nervous system does not fire. And the next trade gets approached with the same clarity as the last, because nothing happened that threatened who you are. Now let me bring these three laws back together, because they function as a system, not independently. The reason you need to understand that every moment is unique is that without it, the emotional weight of your past trades will always contaminate your present decisions. The reason you need to think in probabilities is that without it, you will always evaluate yourself on individual outcomes rather than execution quality across sequences. And the reason you need to accept risk completely is that without it, you will never be free to execute your method with the consistency that allows your edge to actually express itself in your results. They reinforce each other. When you genuinely accept that each moment is unique, accepting risk becomes easier because you are not carrying the emotional residue of every similar-looking setup that went against you in the past. When you genuinely think in probabilities, accepting risk on individual trades becomes easier because the potential loss feels exactly like what it is, one expected sample in a distribution rather than a catastrophe. And when you genuinely accept risk completely, seeing each moment clearly becomes easier because you are not distorting your perception of the current market through the lens of what you cannot afford to lose. What these three laws produce, when they are truly internalized and not just intellectually understood, is something I can only describe as freedom. Not freedom from losses. You will still lose trades, regularly and inevitably, as every trader does, but freedom from the fear of losing. Freedom from the desperate need to be right on every trade. Freedom from the emotional roller coaster that most traders ride their entire careers without ever fully escaping. Freedom to sit at your screen, see a valid setup according to your rules, take it without hesitation, manage it according to your plan, and exit cleanly at your stop or your target, and then move immediately to the next trade with no emotional carryover from the last one. That is what trading without fear actually looks like. Not the absence of risk, not a system that never loses, but a mind that has genuinely made peace with uncertainty, that has accepted the fundamental nature of the environment it operates in, and stopped fighting that nature in favor of working with it. Getting there is not a matter of reading about these laws or even of agreeing with them intellectually. It is a matter of doing the internal work repeatedly, deliberately, over time to shift beliefs that are deeply embedded and directly contrary to the framework these laws require. It means tracking your trades not just by outcome but by execution quality. It means sitting with losses that were correctly managed and learning to feel neutral about them rather than ashamed. It means building a body of evidence, one trade at a time, that your process works so that the earned confidence that eventually emerges is real rather than manufactured. Most traders want to skip that process. They want the result without the work. And the market accommodates that preference, briefly, by occasionally delivering random wins that feel like confirmation of whatever approach the trader happens to be using at the time. But eventually, for every trader who has not done this internal work, the market takes it back. Not because the market is cruel, but because a mind operating from fear and the need to be right will always, eventually, make decisions that fear and the need to be right require regardless of what the system says to do. The three laws are not the end of the work, they are the beginning of it. But without them as a foundation, everything else you learn about trading rests on ground that cannot support it. Get the foundation right, and the rest has a genuine chance to work. That is what I have seen across decades of watching traders succeed and fail, and it is the most important thing I know. There is one more thing I want to address before I close, because I have seen it trip up even traders who genuinely understand everything I have said so far, and that is the question of confidence. Most traders believe that confidence is what you feel when your system is working, when trades are going your way, when you are in a winning streak, when the market is behaving in a way that validates your approach. And most traders believe that doubt is what you feel when trades go against you, when you are in a drawdown, when the market seems to be doing the opposite of what your analysis suggested. Confidence comes from winning. Doubt comes from losing. If that is your model of confidence, you will never have consistent confidence, because winning and losing will always alternate. No matter how good your system is, no matter how refined your execution, you will have losing stretches. And if your confidence lives or dies with your recent outcomes, your confidence will live or die with your recent outcomes, which means it will be highest exactly when you need to be most careful about overconfidence, and lowest exactly when you need to be most committed to your process. Genuine trading confidence does not come from outcomes. It comes from the accumulated evidence that you can execute your process correctly, regardless of what any individual trade does. Every time you take a valid setup without hesitation, that is evidence. Every time you honor your stop without moving it, that is evidence. Every time you let a winner run to your target instead of cutting it short, that is evidence. Over time, those pieces of evidence build into something solid, a foundation of earned confidence that does not depend on the last trade going your way, because your confidence is in your process, not in your outcomes. That distinction is not just philosophical. It has enormous practical implications for how you experience drawdowns. A trader whose confidence is outcome-based will spiral during a losing streak, doubting the system, doubting themselves, potentially abandoning a valid approach at exactly the moment the distribution is about to turn in their favor. A trader whose confidence is process-based will experience a losing streak differently. They will review their execution. Did I take valid setups? Did I manage positions correctly? Did I honor my stops? And if the answer is yes, they will maintain their confidence and continue executing, because the losing streak tells them nothing about the quality of their process. It tells them only that they are in the rough part of their distribution, which is exactly where consistent execution is required. This is also why journaling, real journaling, not just recording entry and exit prices, but recording your mental state, your reasoning, your emotional reactions. Your execution quality is not optional for traders who want to reach consistency. It is how you build the body of evidence that grounds your confidence in something real. It is how you distinguish between a rough patch caused by normal distribution variance and a rough patch caused by actual execution problems. And it is how you maintain your own honesty about which one you are in, at a time when the emotional pull will always be to blame the system rather than acknowledge the execution issue. I am not going to pretend that any of this is easy. The three laws, every moment is unique, think in probabilities, accept risk completely, are easy to state and genuinely difficult to embody. They require you to operate in ways that are directly contrary to psychological patterns that took decades to form and that evolution spent millions of years refining. The mind you bring to trading was not built for trading. It was built for a very different kind of environment, and it will resist the changes required with considerable force. But the traders who do this work, who take these laws seriously as behavioral commitments and not just intellectual frameworks, they change. Not just as traders, but as people. The same relationship with uncertainty that makes you effective in the market also makes you more effective everywhere else. The ability to act on incomplete information without being paralyzed by the possibility of being wrong. The capacity to evaluate your own performance honestly without letting your ego distort what you see. The willingness to release attachment to outcomes you cannot control and focus energy on processes you can. These are not just trading skills, they are life skills. The market is a very demanding teacher. It has no patience for self-deception, no sympathy for excuses, and no interest in your feelings about what it should be doing. But it is also a completely fair teacher. It does not target you personally. It does not conspire against you. It simply reflects, with brutal accuracy, the quality of the decisions you are making and the quality of the beliefs driving those decisions. Get the beliefs right. Let the 3 laws work. And give yourself the time and the patience the process requires. That is the whole game. And if you take nothing else from what I've shared today, take this. The reason most traders fail is not lack of intelligence, not lack of effort, not a bad system. It is that they are trying to win a psychological game with psychological tools they have never developed. They are bringing a mind conditioned for certainty into an environment defined by uncertainty, and they are surprised when the collision is painful. The 3 laws give you a different way. A way of being in the market that does not require certainty, does not need every trade to win, does not depend on being right. A way that works with how markets actually function rather than against it. That is not a small thing. For most traders, it is the only thing that ultimately makes the difference between a trading career that survives and one that doesn't. Start there. Build from there. Everything else follows.